Okay. I'm Jesus Lopez. We are in the history room. This is an interview for the Santa Ana Oral History Program. It is approximately 3:40, and today is September 17th. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us a
Yes.
little bit about yourself?
Hi, of course. My name is Marisa Presley. I do prevention and education for Laura's House. Laura's House is a nonprofit organization. We work with victims and survivors of domestic violence, men, women, and children. And I immigrated to Santana when I was a small child from Michoacan.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about your life growing up?
Yeah, I grew up in, like, I don't know if you know any immigrants, but the immigrant life, it was difficult. It was a lot of poverty, a lot of families living in one apartment, a lot of gang infestation. The first place that I actually lived in when I moved to this country was Mini Street. And, it holds a big place in my heart. So, but growing up, I thought that the whole apartment complex was our hacienda. And I thought the community pool was just our pool. And I was only 5 years old when I came to this country. My mother brought us here following the American dream. And it was tough. It was a single woman with two little girls on the train all the way from Michoacan to Santana. And I still remember the train ride with my older sister. It was hard. And coming to America, we really didn't get to see the American dream for a long time. It was more like the American nightmare. I missed my grandma. I missed, my friends since school, and I missed my life in Mexico. And I still miss it. Even to this day, I go back once or twice a year to relive those days that I miss. My father was already working here in Santana. He was working as a chef for Buffums. I don't know if you guys remember Buffums. You're too young. But Buffums used to be a retail store. And they had a cafe, kind of like Nordstrom's. They had a cafe, and my father was a chef there. And, we came to this apartment, and it was infested with cockroaches and rats. And the first couple of years was really, really hard. And then my mother demanded that we get our own place. And soon after that, we moved to a small house, one bedroom, on Pine and Oak. It's not there anymore. I went not too long ago to see if it was still there, but it's gone now. And scary memories, though, of growing up, because I actually grew up in a very violent home. Is it okay if I talk about the violence?
Yeah.
I grew up in a home where there was a lot of machismo, a lot of sexism. My father was an alcoholic. He was, not the kind of alcoholics who dance on top of a table and they, throw a party and pass out. He was actually a really mean drunk, and it was consistent throughout all my growing up years. And my father was very violent towards my mother, towards the family members. He wasn't violent towards anybody else, only us. And my father also, and I'm going to say this to you guys just as this is what happened to me, not like I'm not holding on to it anymore. I've done a lot of therapy, but my father also raped me and my mother. And this is actually normal when you live in a home where there's domestic violence. The statistics show that if you live in a home where there's yelling and screaming and cussing and cursing, violence, the statistics say that the child, if it's a female, is 10 times most likely also being sexually abused. So that happened to me, and my sister was terrified of my father. Her name is Yolanda. She's 1 year older than me. And she used to actually go pee-pee in her pants when she heard him coming through the door if he was drunk. And she was a very terrified little girl. We both suffered from nightmares and night sweats, night tremors, insomnia. And it's actually normal as well for kids who grow up in a violent home. I remember watching my father beat my mom brutally, like she was some dude at a bar. And other family members were there in the home watching this happen, and nobody did anything about it. So I think that as a full circle, where I am now is I work with victims of domestic violence now. And in each victim, I see my family, I see my mother, I see my little brother, my sister, and I hope that the services that are in place now will continue to be in place for victims and survivors in the future, because when I was growing up here in Santana, there was no services for battered women and children. And I think that even if there were services, we probably wouldn't have reached out to them because of our illegal status. Speaking of illegal status, let me tell you about how I ended up in America illegally. I was 5 years old and we came on a train to Tijuana, just my mom and my sister and I. And my mom hired somebody to cross us across the border in a like 1960s VW little bus, blue, it was so cute. And they passed us off as their two children. So we crossed safely, no problem. I remember waking up and there was a beach in San Diego and it was safe. And not until the late 80s did we apply for amnesty, and we were granted amnesty, and now I'm an American citizen, and I'm proud of that. But I'm also proud of my Mexican heritage. I figure if I was born anywhere else in the world, I'd still be proud of being, born anywhere. I went to local schools here in Santana. I went to Roosevelt. I went to Lowell. I also attended Lathrop and Willard. And now I get to go back to those schools as an adult and educate the community on the red flags to look for in an abuser, how to know if your child is in an abusive relationship, and what are the resources available. And going back, for example, I went back to Roosevelt. It just seems so tiny now as an adult, as compared to when I was a little girl. And I lived in Santana most of my life, and if I could do it again, I would move back down to Santana because there's so much culture, there's so much food, there's so much to see, so many places to go to, so much history. And I lived across the street when I was older from Santana High School when I was 12 years old. And I remember you had really two choices growing up back then. You join a gang or you join a gang. And so my mama, she was a forward thinker, and she really wanted to make it better for all of us. So she moved all of us to a different city, Garden Grove, and we stayed there for a few years. So I ended up not going to Santana High School, which is a bummer. I'm not a saint. But I went to Bolsa Grande. And then while I was in Bolsa Grande, I met a man. And this man told me something that no man had ever said to me before, and they were beautiful words. He said, "I love you," and it felt good. I liked hearing those words. It was nice. And I was 14 years old, so you can imagine my hormones are exploding, and I'm in love. And that relationship really quickly turned into an abusive relationship. He was starting to demand things from me that I was not ready to offer, things like ditching school and lying to my parents, having sex. And because I had been abused sexually as a child and even as an adolescent, the last thing I wanted to do was have sex with a man. But I wanted to show him, my boyfriend, that I loved him. So I did, and I got pregnant, which in itself is a sign of an abusive relationship. And I ended up not telling anybody for a long time. I kept it a secret from my family. And I actually kept it a secret from him as well because I really didn't know what to do. I'm 14. I'm confused. At this point, I've been isolated from any friends. So I don't really have any friends to talk to anymore. And I'm a freshman in high school now. And I tell him eventually, I think I'm pregnant. He told me he was not ready to be a father, so he quickly arranged for an abortion. And at the time, I was, going to Catholic church, and I was raised Catholic. I was a good Catholic girl, and I was working at the church. I was also a big part of the youth group at the church. I was a youth leader. I used to participate and be a leader of retreats on weekends. So I felt like I had betrayed my God with this abortion, but I also felt like I was very alone, and I didn't feel like I had a choice in having this. So I went ahead and I done. Even though that day when we were driving to the clinic, I begged him and I cried and I pleaded, let's not do this. And we ended up doing it. Needless to say, I had many years of guilt added on to my Catholic guilt. And I lived with that guilt for, many, many years. And only through therapy and continued therapy have I been able to let go of that guilt and fulfill my life and be in a healthy relationship now. Soon after, I became pregnant again, because what happens in young relationships, especially that are intimate, you never go back to holding hands after you become sexually intimate. So I got pregnant again. And this time I waited and I made sure that I did not tell until it was too late for an abortion. And I ended up giving birth to a beautiful girl. I don't know if this is my culture or if it is my family, but what ended up happening is the families decided that it would be best to marry us. So now I'm married. Instead of a quinceañera, I'm a married young girl, still in high school, in my own apartment with my new husband, a new baby, not even knowing how to sweep or clean. I was like the worst housewife, had no abilities to be a wife at that age, and I was forced to get good grades or else. And I lived with a man who originally had said he loved me and was going to take care of me, and now it was more about I can't do anything right, and a lot of yelling and screaming. It started to remind me a lot of the life that I had lived with my father. There was a lot of isolation. I was not allowed to learn how to drive at 16. I was expected to take the bus to school with my child, with my backpack, with my diaper bag, and go to a teen mother program. And I excelled. I did really well in that program in comparison to regular high school, which was a really horrible experience for me. I just didn't get it. I didn't fit in. But this teen mother program in Garden Grove called Lincoln, I excelled in that program and I did really well. And I actually stayed with him all of my years of high school with this man, and I divorced him after I graduated from high school when I was already 18. And what happened after that was that I lived a very rebellious life. I put myself in a lot of dangerous situations. I was drinking a lot. I was partying a lot. I never did drugs, knock on wood. I don't know why. I never experimented with drugs. I was around drugs. I was around people that consumed drugs, but I just never got into drugs. But I was drinking a lot of alcohol, anything that came out of a bottle. There were many times when I would wake up just passed out, not knowing where I was. And this was my way to rebel. And I did that for many, many years. From one abusive relationship to another, to the next worst relationship than the other. Always thinking that it was the person I was dating who was bad, who was abusive. Not knowing that I had a great responsibility in choosing this individual into my life. And about age 20, I ended up in a mental hospital, which were actually the best years of my life. I was only there a few months, but I actually learned a lot about myself. I was suffering from anorexia. I was attempting a couple of suicide attempts. And, before my first suicide attempt, I used to say, is this too heavy? Can we talk about this? Yeah. I used to say before I attempted suicide that people who attempted suicide and did not actually, do it correctly were idiots, because how can you not kill yourself, And the last time I attempted suicide, I was a lot older than 21. I was old, and I'm still working on that one, so I'm not going to say how old I was, but it wasn't too long ago. It was approximately 16 years ago, and I had the gun right under the palm of my hand, and it was a small weapon. It was a Beretta. It was very small, and it fit right here. And I was sitting on the edge of my bed because I had thought at that time that being alive and breathing was too painful. And just waking up in the morning, realizing that I was taking my first breath hurt. I was suffering from extreme depression, panic attacks, anxiety, and did not know how to deal with all of that. And of course I didn't pull the trigger. I talked myself out of it. I used my child as the reason why I shouldn't die, and I'm glad I did, because soon after I got into very intense therapy. I started kind of soul searching, figuring out if there is a purpose for me here, what is the purpose. Started researching different religions, different techniques like breathing techniques and meditation techniques. Started talking to experts and just really started doing all of the things that the self-help books were telling me to do, and just trying everything to see what was going to work, because it was either I'm going to die or I'm going to do something about this, and major things are going to change for me.
What
So,
made you decide, like, you had to change, that you wanted to change? Was there, like, an event or something?
yeah, there actually was. There was something huge that happened in my life. I had, prior to losing a loved one, somebody that I loved very much passed away. Prior to that, the only person that had ever passed away was my grandma. And I had never experienced the passing of a loved one. And this loved one passed away. His name was Tony. And it really affected me. And I just thought, I'm wasting myself in this sorrow, in this deep hole of depression, that I should do something for him, to make it like, okay, you're still alive, we do something about this. And I started to try to see the beauty first in myself, through self-talk, through affirmations, through literally just changing the voice in my head, that repeat button that said you're fat, you're ugly, you're worthless, and really changing it to you're beautiful, you're thin, you are loved, and interrupting my negative thoughts every time that I caught one, over and over, until now my brain is just trained automatically to where I don't even get the negative thought anymore. It's just positive self-talk. Of course, there's times when I'm scared, or there's fear, or I'm hesitant, and I start to replay that, oh, you're not good enough, or you're not qualified enough, and then right away my self-talk is, you can do this. So I'm kind of like my own cheerleader now. And also, the last time I attempted suicide was with a gun in my hand. I thought about my daughter Jasmine, and I thought, what if she finds me? What a great mom, to say, yeah, I found my mom's brains on the floor after she shot herself. So that was another motivator why I didn't kill myself. But definitely Tony dying was something big for me. It really affected me, and it forced me to look inward, make some changes. So what I started doing is I just started going to the bookstore and just see if a book fell on my head, and just picked it up and started reading. And then one book led to another, and now my house has so many books that I'm actually not allowed to bring another book in until I get rid of another one. So a lot of spiritual work, as far as if there's a greater force, what is that force? What do I believe in? The religion that was instilled in me as a child, I didn't connect with it. I had a lot of questions about it, and I never got the answers that I was looking for. There's a lot of beauty in the religion that I was taught, but I still have a lot of questions. So I started searching for other spiritual, I don't know if they were religions, I just knew that there was something bigger. Started looking for that in books, talking to other individuals, and I found a blueprint that really helped me to bring peace of mind into me. And that was, I started studying Buddhism, and started talking to other Buddhists, and really learning more about how to quiet my mind, because my mind, it's like it's like a stallion. It's just going nonstop, and I wanted to learn how to quiet that mind, because growing up in a violent home, it really affects a human being. For example, some of the ways that a child is affected is through brain development. Our brain does not actually, it doesn't actually build the foundation necessary to be creative or to learn. And scientific studies have shown that the brain development of a child is halted when they live in a violent home. And also, we suffer from a lot of depression, anxiety. As we become adolescents, we run away from home. We enter into a gang. We use drugs and alcohol. We end up in prison. You know, statistically speaking, the Department of Justice says that little boys who grow up in a violent home, that's including here in Santana, they are 1,000 times most likely going to end up in prison. And I didn't want to be a statistic anymore. I wanted to be the opposite of that. I have a little brother who was born when I was 7 years old, and my father was still beating my mother when she was pregnant. And statistically, pregnant women are at the higher risk of being beaten, so it makes sense to me now. But as a child, I wondered, how can you beat my mom? She's pregnant. I mean, literally 9 months pregnant, and he's still beating her. So what my mother did one night is she put a knife to her stomach, and she threatened to kill herself and the baby if he beat her again. And the beatings, the physical beatings, stopped in my home for a long time soon after that, but not the verbal attacks. The humiliations continued, the yelling and the screaming, the cussing was still there. The physical attack started again soon after my little brother was born. But my little brother, you know, he did time. He didn't even enter a gang. According to him, he was el mero mero of the gang. He started his own gang. He dropped out of high school. He was involved in, you know, petty crimes, from, you know, stealing bikes to grand theft auto. And I remember visiting him here in Santana at the jail once on a Sunday. And I had to wait in so many lines for so long to see him that I told him, this is the first and the only time I'm going to visit you. I love you, but, you know, I like my Sundays. And fast forward to where my little brother Carlos is right now. He's an awesome member of his community. He is a public speaker for the boys now who are incarcerated. He has a beautiful home. He has toys, motorhome, and bikes. And I'm not saying like he has this stuff to say this is what he has, but just to show you what he has accomplished, even though the odds were totally against him. He has a beautiful wife. They've been married for 10 years. They have 2 biological kids, Caden and Corbin, beautiful boys. And then they just adopted a little girl who was born physically ill. From the moment she came out of the womb, she was born sick. And now they are in the process of adopting another little boy who was also born physically ill because he was born to a mother who was addicted to crack. A lot of abuse in his early days. And, you know, he's a healthy man right now, but continues to go to therapy. And he's not ashamed of that. He was diagnosed bipolar, as I'm sure a lot of people in my family are, you know. There's no shame in that. My sister Yolanda, she's quite a character, my sister. She is like the lion in The Wizard of Oz. On the outside, she's like, you know, put him up. But on the inside, she's a pussycat. And the way I think that my sister, my daughter, because we're so close, sometimes I think she's my daughter. She's actually my best friend. The way I think that my sister Yolanda was affected through growing up in a violent home here in Santana was that she got to physically see my father rape me. And so she grew up with a lot of guilt because as an 8-year-old, she couldn't do anything about it. And she grew up with this guilt thinking, why did I not help my little sister, you know? And also when the fights would break out, I call them the fights, but it was really my father fighting everybody else. My mother wasn't really fighting anybody. My mother would get beaten if she didn't say a word, and she would get beaten if she spoke up. So there was no winning with my father. My father could rant and rave about a dirty fork. My father could terrorize an entire family for days. And although I think the neighbors knew about it, nobody did anything about it. My uncles, my tias, nobody did anything about the violence that was happening at home. And so I say this now as an adult. I wonder if the person doing the beating and the raping in my home was a stranger. If a total stranger came into my home on Pine Street or on Myrtle and Flower, if it was a stranger, what would my uncles have done to that stranger? What would my grandma and grandfather have done to the stranger that was beating up on their daughter-in-law on their grandbabies. What would the neighbors have done if it was a stranger? And I'll tell you, if it was a stranger, people would have done something about it. But because it was my mother and it was her intimate partner who was committing the crime, nobody did anything about it. So I'm hoping now with the work that I'm doing at Laura's house that no child has to go through what me and my little brother and sister had to go through in that home. Because domestic violence is a crime. And it is a crime here. And it's a crime in beautiful, rich Orange County. And it's a silent crime. Even if people know about it, nobody's talking about it. So, I could talk for days and days. As you can hear the roughness in my voice. This isn't me trying to sound sexy. This is just me because I'm passionate about talking about domestic violence. I'm passionate about raising awareness on it. And I'm passionate on being the one that people say, who brought her to the party? Why does she have to talk about domestic violence today? Because if we can't talk about domestic violence at a party, at a carne asada, at a gathering, then when can we talk about it, So I can talk forever. It's up to you.
Can you tell us a little bit about Laura's house, like the history and what you guys do there and how you got involved?
Yeah, sure. I love talking about Laura's house. I have a platform through the agency that I work for to do the work that I do, so I'm very blessed and I'm honored. We are the only South County shelter for battered women. We also have a counseling and a resource center. We're based out of South County, but we will absolutely accept anybody into our program from anywhere in the nation. It doesn't matter where you come from. And we are named after a real woman. Her name was Laura, and she was beaten to death by her husband. I'll tell you a little bit about the autopsy report because I think it's important for you to know the extent of her injuries that were caused by her partner, the man she loved. He broke 2 of her ribs. Her left lung was collapsed from the beating. Her skull was cracked open. Her brain was hemorrhaging. It was bleeding internally. They couldn't stop the bleeding in her brain. There were cuts and bruises all over her body. And she left behind 2 small children when she passed away. One of those children at the time was 6 years old, and he's now a police officer here in Orange County. Her husband served 0 time for allegedly killing his wife. There was no investigation. On the bottom of the death certificate for Laura, it reads that it is unknown how these injuries happened. The case swept under the rug, as many cases were back then, over 20 years ago when our agency was founded. Laura's mother was the one that was instrumental. She wanted to raise awareness that this was happening and that it happened to her baby. And so she started going from community to community in Orange County and just talking to regular folks just like us. And she started talking about domestic violence and what could we do as a community to assist those who are living in a violent home. And she got a lot of people who were not ready to help. 20 years ago, nobody was talking about domestic violence. It was taboo. It was a family secret, and you don't want to air out your dirty laundry, so nobody's going to talk about it. And there was a community in South Orange County who was prepared to talk about this. And we held our first, town hall meeting, just started talking, and through many meetings, started forming a committee. And the first Laura's House board members were formed, and we ended up opening our very first counseling and resource center in San Juan. And then soon after followed the 24-hour crisis hotline, which is still enforced now, 24 hours a day, every day of the year, holidays, weekends, where there is somebody on the other end in any language, because we actually have a line that's a language line, so we can access any language basically on the planet. And there'll always be somebody on the other end who will advocate for you if you call. And we have a counseling and resource center in Ladera Ranch, not only for those who have been able to flee their home and escape the violence, but also for those who are still in the violent home, thinking of leaving but don't know really what steps to take. So what we do is we educate them. We offer them support groups. We offer one-on-one talk therapy, play therapy, art therapy. We also offer services at the Counseling and Resource Center to men, which, a lot of people think domestic violence doesn't happen to men. And unfortunately, it happens to men. Statistically speaking, I can't tell you how many men it happens to because nobody's talking about it. Men are not going to report it. Who are they going to tell? There are actually 0 shelters for men who are battered in Orange County, California. And it's one of the richest counties in the world, and there's no shelters for battered men. There's more shelters for animals in our county than there are for humans. I'm an animal advocate as well, but it doesn't make sense. So what I do for Laura's House is I change my hat often, but I love my job because I get to meet a lot of really interesting people. I get to meet and be face to face with the victims and the survivors. What I do is I do presentations on dating abuse, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and I do them at different locations: middle schools, high schools, colleges, universities, civic clubs, congregations, churches, anywhere where people meet. I'm invited to talk about this topic. And another thing that I do for Laura's House is that I facilitate a training. It's called the 40-hour Domestic Violence Advocate Training. And what this training does is it's mandated by the state of California for anybody who wants to work directly with victims of domestic violence. They want to work either as an employee or as a volunteer. This is a mandate. So I put together the training, I facilitate it, I bring in guest speakers, and I spend the entire 40 hours of the training with the students. I do that now at Laura's House 3 times per year. And another thing that I do is I do all of the outreach and all of the education for the Spanish-speaking community. Sometimes even for those that don't speak Spanish, if they speak Portuguese, we'll make it happen. But that's what I do. So I do the education and the prevention aspect of Laura's House. And I've been doing that for about 7 years now. And I started at Laura's House because I was a stay-at-home mom and I was really bored at the time. And my son, who is now 14, Nick, he was starting school full-time. And I thought this is a good time for me to go back to work. And I made a list before going back to work of what are the places, or more specifically, what are the populations that I want to work with? Who do I want to work with? And on top of my list was the dead. I actually wanted to work as a mortician, either somehow with getting the body ready for service, or working with the grieving family members. And I also wanted to work, because of my history and my life story, with victims of domestic violence. I applied at both at the same time. And I think I was too eager at the mortuary. So they didn't even give me a call back. But Laura's House called back. And I started my career with Laura's House as a hotline advocate, answering the 24-hour crisis hotline. I loved it. I thought it was the best job in the world. And soon after that, I was kind of put in the position of case management as a fill-in. And it was an awesome position. I really had thought that I was going to do that position for the rest of my life because it just really fit with what I was looking for in a career. And this position of prevention education specialist was actually offered to me by my boss at the time, Dr. Nadia Islam, and she saw something in me, I guess, that I hadn't seen in me as far as public speaking. And I didn't accept at first, but I accepted after I did some soul searching, and that's what I do now. I'm a public speaker, and I'm honored. I'm blessed because I get to meet people like you,
What do you feel is the cause of domestic violence? Like, what starts it?
Well, domestic violence is a learned behavior, and so we learn it at home. And I wish I could tell you, like, this is the reason why it happens, and then we could go and put all of our resources onto fixing this one reason, and then we could eliminate domestic violence. But it's more complex than that. But I can tell you one thing for sure that all of us experts know about domestic violence. It does not happen because, for example, my father was drunk, or he had a rough childhood, or he's under a lot of stress or has a mental illness. Those are not the reasons why domestic violence happens. The abuser, perpetrator, male or female, they do not abuse because of an outside force. They abuse because they have a need, and the need is to have control over the victim. They have to have power and control over the victim. And of course, alcohol, drugs, mental illness, those are factors. They do factor in why an abuser would abuse, but they are not the reason. So even if you were to work on your rough childhood, you go to therapy and you work on your alcoholism and drug abuse, and you are, really in tune spiritually, you can still be an abuser because it's about control. It's about controlling the other person. And if as a child you grew up in a violent home, you are most likely going to either be the abuser or become the victim. So I always tell parents when I speak to them is, look at the relationship that you are in right now with your intimate partner. And now look at your children who are dating or are in dating age. Because the relationship that you are in right now is most likely the example of the relationship that they are going to be in today. So it is learned behavior. We do learn it at home. We don't learn it in the movies, and we don't learn it in violent video games. So that question, what is the seed? I don't have an answer except to say that everything you've heard about why an abuser's abuse is a myth. It's an excuse. It's not the reason. It is just basically about the need to control and to have power over the individual. And one thing about that is that once the perpetrator feels, even if it's a something that they just imagined, they sense that they're going to lose control, they're going to lose power over the victim or the victims, they will do whatever it takes to gain that power back, even if it means harassing, stalking, killing, setting on fire. So this talking about domestic violence is so serious that we should definitely be just having people over all the time to talk about this and to open up just a little window to this conversation.
How do you think we can improve on that?
I think through education is the way that we can improve. And educating, like for example, right now I'm doing a lot of high schools, but it would never be too late to talk about domestic violence and to educate somebody. But I feel like I could get in earlier. I feel that if parents were more open to having us speak to their middle schoolers, even as far as elementary school kids, I know parents do not want to hear this, but I hear it. They're dating in 6th grade. They're having intimate relationships because my youngest victim of dating abuse is 12 years old. And that means, and she was with him for 7 months. And in a relationship, when you are that young, the relationships moves really fast. These kids move at the speed of light. So that means that for her, it must have been 7 months of pure violence and abuse. So I think through education, educating our teens and our preteens, our parents too, on what are the red flags to look for when you do, agree to go on that first date with somebody. What are the red flags to look for on the first date? How do you know? Just based on having a conversation with somebody, what are those questions that you should ask to let you know if that person is a potential abuser? So that education. Also, educating individuals on the different types of abuse, because a lot of people unfortunately believe that domestic violence, dating abuse is only the physical type, when there's so many other types like mental and spiritual, financial and sexual. So educating them on that. So I think that the key right now is through education. In what year was that? 2012. I went to Sacramento, and I brought with me a teen who was a high school student at the time, who had been in a very abusive relationship and had escaped that abuse. And she received a lot of, what should I call it, from her fellow classmates at her high school. She received a lot of negative responses because she reported him. And what she was told was, how could you do that to him? How could you report him? It must have been your fault. So educating people on looking at a domestic violence victim as a victim, not a willing participant, and looking as a perpetrator as somebody who's committing a crime. That education as well. When we were in Sacramento, what we were trying to do was there was a bill that had been presented to our legislators. It was Bill 1880. And we dubbed that bill the Cindy Santana bill because Cindy Santana was a high school student in a high school in Los Angeles who on September 30th of 2011 was stabbed to death inside her cafeteria in broad daylight in front of thousands of students. And there was a lot of warning signs, a lot of red flags, and nobody did anything. Not that nobody didn't want to do anything, but nobody knew what to do. So we presented this bill to our legislators, just basically wanting to introduce a mandate to the state of California, to all middle and high schools, to introduce the program like the one we have at Laura's house. The HEART program is the program that we have where it stands for Healthy Emotions and Attitudes in Relationships for Teens. And that's where I come in. And I do these presentations, these educational presentations. And basically, what we wanted is for the legislators to mandate that all schools offer, even if it's just an hour in the curriculum of education on dating abuse. We failed, our attempts failed, but we're going to keep doing it, every year until we are heard. And the reason that I brought this young woman with me to Sacramento was because she had a story to tell, and she was very eloquent about telling her story. And she also had she held the title of Miss Teen Laguna Hills. And I wanted her, with her crown and her sash, to march up there to Sacramento and to talk about the reality of what's happening. And, it's unfortunate that something grassroots like bringing attention to dating abuse, it can't be heard loud and clear. But we're not going to stop. And even if I lose my voice, we're still going to go out there, with the blowhorn. And one of the biggest highlights, actually, of my life, not just of my career, is that while I was in Sacramento, I was invited to speak at Capitol Hill on the steps, with legislators and the community and the media. And I was able to tell a little bit about my story. And for me, as a Mexican girl, as an immigrant, as a girl who was in a very, very violent environment most of her life, to be standing there, on those steps and actually speaking, it almost makes it worth it. Sometimes I tell my sister Yolanda, everything that we witnessed, everything that was done to us by my father, it's almost worth it now, looking back, because I get to chat with other girls and other boys who are in that environment right now, and I might be the first person that they talk to about it. I might be the first person that they say, I was raped or I was beaten. And so for that, I'm grateful that I don't get to educate these teens just based on what I've read in books, but I get to talk about it from experience. And I think that opens up a huge door for them as far as building a relationship with me and trusting me.
What changes do you hope to see in the future regarding domestic violence?
That's a really good question. Since the 1990s, when Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered, allegedly by her husband, there have been some changes that have already occurred since the 1990s. They're small changes, but what I would like to see is more arrests, more prison time, more education, and more rehabilitation, not only for the victims, the family members, the people who are standing by witnessing, but also rehabilitation for the abuser, so that when he goes out again and starts dating again, it's not the repeated cycle of abuse over and over. Small changes that I hope to see right now is that there's more funding for agencies like Laura's House, more funding for education. Right now, most of my funding for our heart program comes from corporate grants, individual donations. So I'd like to see a lot more funding. And in sisterhood, kind of what do I want to see? I want to see women stop calling each other the B word. I want to see women really forming a sisterhood that says, you know what, you cannot treat my sister this way, because when she falls, I'm going to be right here to pick her up. Because one thing I've learned about men, and I love men, I adore men, I respect and admire men. I'm not a man hater, been accused of being a man basher. When I start spewing facts, 95% of all the reported cases of domestic violence in Orange County, the man is a perpetrator. But those are the reported cases. So I know that there's a lot of cases where the man is a victim and they don't report. But I want to see the brotherhood that the men have that goes back to the beginning of time. I want to see that kind of brotherhood with the sisters. I want to see the sisters speaking up for each other and picking each other up when we fall. That's what I'd like to see, just like my community here in Santa Ana in Orange County. And the bigger picture, I would like to see people stop blaming the victim of rape, victim of sexual assault, victim of intimate partner violence, like Rihanna was blamed for what was done to her. And if it was a victim of a carjacker, nobody blames the victim. Nobody blames the victim of a drunk driver. So I'd like to see those kinds of changes sooner than later.
Why do you think people always tend to blame the victim of domestic violence or rape?
Well, I think the media doesn't help, because the victim is painted a picture of a promiscuous, look what she was wearing, she must have been drinking or flirting with him, she was provocative. I mean, if everybody that was provocative got raped, then everybody that walked the red carpet would be raped after they walked it, because they're provocative. I think the media plays a huge role in that. I think that we still, as a society, do not see those types of victims as actual victims. We see them as participants. And when we start seeing them as what they really are, then I think things will start to change. And that's my hope, when I speak to the community, is to start seeing the victim as a victim, because the victim, she or he, they are in that situation because they don't have a choice. Because if they had a choice, they would not have chosen to be raped. They would not have chosen to be stalked, set on fire like my friend Nancy. They would not have chosen to be in an abusive relationship. If they had choices, they would not have chosen that one. So I don't know. I don't have that answer just based on what, that I've learned. I also used to blame the victim, because I thought the victim must have done something, There must have been something she said to provoke him, to provoke her. But that's not the case, because what happened to walking away? What happened to somebody in your face calling you out and just walking away? We need to practice that more often. So yeah, let's stop blaming the victim of those types of crimes, because number one, they are crimes. And number two, she or he is not a willing participant in this horrible act of violence that's being committed against them.
What advice do you have to people that witness domestic violence or are involved in it or victims of it?
For witnesses,
Mm-hmm.
The advice that I say is, don't just stand by and watch it happen. Do something. And the only thing that you have to do is call 911. That's it. You don't have to get in anybody's face. You don't have to call somebody out. You don't have to put yourself in a dangerous situation. But call 911. More people will call 911 if a dog is being kicked than if a human. More people will call 911 if the music is too loud at their neighbor's house. But nobody calls 111 when there's yelling and screaming. When you hear somebody say, no, don't, please stop, you're hurting me, dial 911. That's it. Because if you don't, as a bystander, just do something, then you are perpetuating that violence as well. For victims and survivors, I like to call them survivors regardless of where they are in the relationship. Even if they are still in that violent environment, I choose to call them survivors because they're still surviving every day, Every day they're walking on eggshells. Every day they're waiting for something to happen. Every day they're trying to like not do or say anything that would trigger the abuser. So they're survivors in my eyes. I think victims honestly are in the ground, you know? So my advice for survivors is to take it easy. It's not your fault. None of it is your fault. There is help, and do not do it alone. That's my advice. And you know, we have a 24-hour crisis hotline. I'm going to give it out because it's available for anybody. It's 866-498-1511, and it's open 24 hours a day. And there's somebody with a really kind heart who is very passionate about their job on the other end of the phone, who has been trained in domestic violence, who will be able to guide you. So even if, as a survivor, as a victim who's living in it right now, all you do is you call this hotline and you say, I don't even know why I'm calling. We will guide you through the phone call. And in the middle of the call, if you decide to hang up, you change your mind, that's okay too. And you know, advice for family members who have a friend, a loved one who's in an abusive relationship is to do three things. One is to let them know that you are not going to judge them, that it is not their fault, and that you are here to just listen and not to give advice. Number two, offer them resources like that 24-hour crisis hotline for Laura's house I just gave you. Offer them resources. And number three, and this is the most important one, and this is also the hardest one, is be there for them every time that they decide to leave and break up. Because in average, it takes a survivor of domestic violence 7 times to leave and return. So an average of 7, leaving and returning, leaving and returning. We return for the same reasons that we couldn't leave in the first place. The kids, money, religious pressure, low self-esteem, lack of resources, shame, embarrassment, fear is the number one reason. And so we return to our abuser even after we've left for those same reasons. Fear of being alone, fear of being abandoned, fear of not being able to make ends meet, fear of the threats, fear of the harassment, the stalking. So I tell family members, be there for the person you're trying to help, even if it is the 12th time that they have left. Because what you want to start building is a safe place for this individual to crash and land when they are at the very rock bottom. So they will be able to reach out to that one family member who is still there for them, who does not blame them for returning, and who says to them, you know what, next time I'll be here for you. And here's the resources.
Do you guys have any questions?
I was actually, Manny Singh, I was actually wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about domestic violence in the context of the immigrant community and what some of those challenges have been kind of working here. And
Yeah, that's a good question. The challenges of an immigrant. The challenges of your status. The good thing is that we are talking to the immigrant community. We are not being silent. I am being invited all over the place through the Sheriff's Department GRIP program, through congregations, local pastors here in local churches. One of my favorite pastors is Father John Peterson, and he's out of a Lutheran church across the street from Willard. He'll invite me even to his congregation in the middle of service to talk about domestic violence. And, you know, there's a lot more challenges that these survivors face because where are they going to turn to? Who's going to help them? And they're afraid of their status. And so what we offer to them is all of the services that any other person, regardless of status, will get. In the initial phone call, if you do call the hotline, you will be asked for your social security number, and if you say I don't have one, we just move on to the next question. No other questions asked. Obtaining restraining orders, we can also do that for anybody, no matter of their status. We also offer legal advocacy and a clinic. So if you are right now a victim or a survivor of domestic violence, and I'm just going to give this briefly because I don't know much about the law, it's not my expertise, but what we offer is through a program called VAWA. It stands for Violence Against Women's Act, we offer a visa for any survivor or victim who is married, legally married, to an American citizen or to anybody who has legal status in this country. But they themselves, the victim, does not have legal status. We can actually help them through pro bono attorneys to seek that immigration status through visas, U visa and other types of visas that are available. And for that, they would just contact our office at 949-361-3775 and make an appointment with our legal advocates. We have 3 legal advocates and 2 of them speak Spanish. As a matter of fact, one of them graduated from Santana High School, and her name is Magdalena, and she's ready, to talk to anybody, to give guidance, to offer resources, and to walk step by step onto what are the benefits, what are your rights, even if you are not, your status here is not of legal status, that doesn't matter to us. But getting that person to make a phone call is the hard part, because a lot of the victims are threatened by the abuser. If you call the police after I beat you, I will call immigration and you'll be deported. If you call the police, I'll take the kids and you'll never see them again. So there's that fear. So through our education, that's what we're doing, is we're talking to the community regardless of status and telling you, you have rights. You are not alone. So that's an awesome question.
Anything else? Is there?
I guess also just what do you see as kind of next steps that this current generation can take to deal with this issue more head on? Because you did talk about the way that we're talking about it a little bit more. 20 years ago, this was not a conversation that we would be having.
Mm-hmm.
But the steps that youth can kind of do to be involved in that process.
Yeah, the youth. What can the youth do to get more involved? And a couple of things that come to mind is call out your friends and family when you see that it just ain't right the way they've been talking to their girl, the way they've been treating their boyfriend. You just pull off your cousin, your little prima off to the side, your sobrina, and you go, come here, mija. You know the way you talk to your boyfriend right now? Do you know that's embarrassing for him? And how do you think it makes him feel when you degrade him or you humiliate him? So calling our friends and family out, number one. Privately, of course. Don't call somebody out in public and embarrass them, Just call them out in private. Calling out, your Theo, the one that tells all the dirty jokes. Call him out. Pull him off to the side and say, Theo, you know what? Our generation, we don't do dirty jokes like that. That's degrading, not only to women, it just makes men look bad. So calling out those individuals who are sexist, homophobic, racist, and really making a stand and saying, you can't do that in my home, because this is my home and we're not going to tolerate this. Participating in events like the annual candlelight vigil that we offer every February for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month in honor of Jackie Villagomez, who had just graduated from El Toro High School and was beaten to death by her boyfriend a couple months after. We have a vigil. Participate in Take Back the Night events. Participate in any event that any college or university is holding. Just be there as a body. Even if you have a cold body, we need bodies to show these legislators that we're serious about this. Also, I think through the violence that we get to watch on TV, just saying no. When you get invited to that next fight, to that next UFC fight, make a stand and say, you know what? I don't like violence on TV. It makes me nervous. It gives me anxiety. And I get to work with people who are punched every day. I don't want to be entertained by it. And your family and friends are probably going to be like, ooh, look at her. She's so sensitive. Yes, I am. I'm very sensitive to crude jokes. I'm very sensitive to violence against anybody, even if it's 2 grown men who signed a contract and put themselves in a ring. Yes, I'm very sensitive to that. So start calling each other out. Start participating in community events. And, tell the media your sexist music videos, they're not going to fly with me. They're not going to fly with Santa Ana. And they're not going to fly at my college or university. We're not going to watch them. But I think more closely is to start at home and to say, you know what, Tia? I notice how your partner treats you, and there is help for you.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just thank you. This was awesome. I loved it. It's like being home, in Santana. So thank you so much for the opportunity and for the chance to talk about my favorite topic. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.